Welcome everyone. Today we are going to study, or rather have an overview of a poem by the great late poet Kamala. The name of the poem is The Old Playhouse. This may be counted as a very insightful feminist poem, and therefore we have to understand that before beginning the text of this poem, we must take a very short outline. We must talk about a very short outline of feminism as a whole. The key argument of feminism is equality of rights between genders. However, there are several substrands of feminism which often talk about quite distinct issues distinct from each other. This is because just as there are many countries on the face of the earth, likewise the societies that inhabit the countries, even the individuals that inhabit the same country, they are often divided by class, caste, and other parameters. Therefore, what may be the troubles of a poor Indian woman may not be the same troubles faced by a rich American woman. The point is that no matter where you are, if you are a woman, patriarchal society will impose upon you restrictions of freedom, restrictions of expression, lifestyle, everything. In one way or another, women are oppressed by patriarchy. Now, this is not just my personal opinion or even the opinion of women at large, but there have been very thorough studies of society and cultures through the last couple of centuries, and we must actually, if we have to understand this poem, we must read at least some portions of the important texts of feminism, such as A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, then The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, and Sexual Politics by Kate Millett. Of course, there are many other important texts of feminism, but these three are absolutely essential to gain an overall idea of the movement and to understand why this is real, this issue is real, and how society may be improved from its present condition by taking into account various strands, various theories of feminism. We have to go through at least the overall idea expressed in these texts. So, let us begin a study of the text. You planned to tame a swallow, to hold her in the long summer of your love, so that she would forget not the raw seasons alone, and the homes left behind, but also her nature, the urge to fly, and the endless pathways of the sky. These lines express a very core idea of feminism and also of several other theories that talk about the process of otherization, the two categories of the self and the other. What's the point here? The point is, whenever a human talks about some other entity, be it another person, be it another animal, or be it anything at all which is not himself or not herself, then he will automatically impose on this other entity certain characteristics. Generally, he will not try to understand what the other thing actually is, but rather try to impose his preconceived notions about the entity onto it. These may be sounding a little too abstract, so let me clarify with an example. Suppose I am a human and I am walking on the street and I come across a dog. Now, I have certain notions about the animal dog. I know that dogs are friendly animals. I know dogs are very quiet unless provoked. I also know that if I give the dog some food to eat, maybe the dog would want to eat it. I also know that I should not kick the dog because if I kick it, it will get angry and attack me. Now the thing is that the moment I see the dog, I impose all these conclusions on it automatically. I never stop to ask the dog about how it feels. Well, this example is rather extreme because how would you ask a dog, how are you? Because dogs cannot speak, it will not be able to reply. But the point is that just like animals and objects, when we encounter a person who is not like ourselves, suppose I am an Indian man, if I meet a Japanese man on the streets, I will imagine certain things about the man even without asking him how he is, who he is, or what he feels about certain things. There are certain ideas associated with being Japanese. Suppose he keeps everything very tip-top, very clean. He may be extremely scientifically oriented. He may have a tremendous sense of aesthetics. These are some of the stereotypes about Japanese people that may be found in the opinions circulating all around the world, in newspapers, in the internet. My point was that I would not stop to ask him. I will arrive at these conclusions almost instantly on looking at him. Likewise, in the immediate context of the poem, here the first lines are invoking an image of a man grabbing hold of a swallow and keeping it with him. The swallow is the narrator or the wife, and the man who is the captor of the bird is the husband. Husband assumes authority as the self, and he denotes the swallow or his wife as the other. In a patriarchal system, the husband as the self will determine every choice for the wife, and the wife's existence or the swallow's existence, in the case of this metaphor, will depend on the choices of the husband and the will of the husband, the man. This part further elaborates the feeling of otherization, the feeling of oppressing the other. See, this man who is the captor, the bird had also flown to the man. The woman had also wanted to marry the man, not because she wanted to gather knowledge of yet another man, not because he was the subject of study for her, but she also wanted to learn what she was, and by learning, she wanted to learn to grow. This is a rather a little bit different idea. This means that the ideal of marriage for the narrator is that two people will be knowing each other, will be exchanging ideas about each other and about the world at large, and thereby, through mutual sharing of knowledge, they will grow as persons. The more I understand my neighbors, the more I understand my family, my friends, the more I can grow as a person. Because it is a very human characteristic to learn from knowing about others. The more I know, the better person I will be. That is the ideal of marriage according to the narrator, according to this woman. But what did the man do? The man only taught about himself. That means this man knows only to care for himself, and therefore whatever he does prioritizes him only, which means that he is a self-centered man. He is not an empathetic man. Now, no matter how self-centered someone is, no matter how limited their worldview, everybody teaches you something. This is another axiom. This is another idea expressed by the narrator of the poem. Even this self-centered man has lessons to offer. That is interesting. The only sad part is that for a self-centered man, the only thing he can offer any knowledge about is himself. So that is what the husband did. He offered knowledge, but only about himself. And obviously we can imagine he offered the knowledge unconsciously. He was not willing to share. He was only talking about himself. Keep me happy like this. Keep me happy by doing that. Don't do this. I don't like that. Do that. I like that. Only things like this. Commands like this. You were pleased with my body's response, its weather, its usual shallow convulsions. Now we are entering a phase of sexual imagery. The narrator is going to describe the process of sexual lovemaking. And as is common with Kamala Das's style, she does it very intricately and very tenderly and expresses deeper philosophical impressions through her use of sexual lovemaking imagery. So let us see. You were pleased with my body's response. So when the husband is making love to the wife, he is pleased with his wife's bodily response. Its weather, its usual shallow convulsions. See, even when they are going to make love, the husband is not thinking of sharing the pleasure. The husband is not thinking of doing the act of lovemaking on equal terms. He assumes authority. He becomes the master, and she becomes something like a slave. She becomes the subject of his passion. He will be pleased. The pleasure will be his, and the wife's duty is to provide that pleasure. The wife has no pleasure of her own. The wife cannot think for herself. She is property. And as a good property, he takes care of her. See here, you embalmed my poor lust with your bittersweet juices. So he is investing in his wife. He is investing in this property, which is his wife. In return, he expects satisfaction. In return, he expects to be pleased. You called me wife. I was taught to break saccharin into your tea and to offer at the right moment the vitamins. Here begins the other miscellaneous training. See, the wife is not required in Indian society. In particular, the wife is not only required to provide sexual satisfaction. She also has to fulfill other day-to-day functions, such as breaking saccharin into the husband's tea and to offer vitamins at the right moment. You see, we all know how women are treated in traditional Indian houses. We are not yet too much advanced from that. All the nitty-gritty details of household chores are maintained by women. From the big chores to the small chores, in most households, it is the automatic duty of the woman to see after these things. Cowering beneath your monstrous ego, I ate the magical loaf and became a dwarf. This line is extremely important. Cowering beneath your monstrous ego, I ate the magic loaf and became a dwarf. It is almost like magic, the way a ruthless man forces his personality on his wife and turns her into a dwarf. It is often seen in India that relatively independent-minded women who were independent-minded before marriage, perhaps they practice music, perhaps they practice painting, perhaps they hold a respectable job before marriage, but as soon as they marry, their in-laws or their husband prevent them from further engaging with their passion. An actress before marriage often retires from acting after marriage. Likewise for singers, women singers, or in many cases, women job holders, they are not allowed to keep their jobs, they are not allowed to pursue the art of their dreams when they are married, because after marriage, they become property, and a property does not have its own rights. This cell phone that I am recording this video on, this cell phone is my property. If this cell phone wanted to go to a job, I could not allow it, because this cell phone has to stay with me and do my work. It is my property. So the thing is somewhat like that. Women are treated as property by men of such monstrous ego, and the patriarchal system supports it. That is the meaning of becoming a dwarf. You see, before she ate the magic loaf, the loaf of bread, presumably, before she ate it, she used to be a full-sized human. She used to have some passions of her own. She used to have some dreams of her own. But as soon as she ate the loaf, as soon as she entered into his service or his household as married wife, she lost all the rights. She lost all her passions. She was supposed to lose all her passions and dreams and become a dwarf, a miniature version of what she used to be. Still a human, but only in form, not with human dignity, without dignity. I lost my will and reason to all your questions. I mumbled incoherent replies. This is another important sentence. This shows the mental handicap forced on the wife by the oppressive husband. The wife loses her will, her reason, because she is not given any chance to exercise her will or reason. It doesn't matter whether he wants to cook or not. She has to cook dinner. It does not matter whether she wants to accompany her husband to perhaps a party, because she must go. It is her duty as the wife to attend with her husband. It doesn't matter whether she wants to take the children to school or to take them back from school, because it is her duty to look after the children. She always must look after the children. The summer begins to pall. The summer may be translated as a metaphor for her youth. Gradually, the married woman grows older, and gradually, the intensity of her passions also decreases. The summer begins to pall. I remembered the rudder breezes of the fall and the smoke from the burning leaves. These are signs, presumably, of her waning passions, of the sense of wastage that she feels inside herself, as she is not free to exercise her individuality, as she is bound to follow almost slave-like rules, slavery-like rules, to satisfy her husband and presumably her husband's family members. She feels that her insides are burning away, wasting away. Fall as a season signifies waste. Fall or autumn, autumn and fall. These are seasons that signify waste. Leaves turn slowly to yellow and red and fall off. And burning leaves is another apt metaphor for the sense of wastage. Your room is always lit by artificial lights. Your windows always shut. Here begins a description of the household, of the atmosphere of where the husband lives, the atmosphere of the husband's house. How is it? Your room is always lit by artificial lights. There is light. Maybe the husband is a scholar in his professional life. Maybe the husband is known as a very big, kind-hearted man. But all these so-called lights of knowledge, lights of wisdom, they are artificial. Because you see, unless you are mature enough to grant personhood to your own spouse, to your own wife, unless you are mature enough to respect her as an equally intelligent or as an equally individual person, then all your scholarship is but a waste. All your scholarship is only superficial or artificial. That is why your room is always lit by artificial lights. and your windows always shut. Generally, oppressive men, oppressive husbands, do not think about relatively inclusive thoughts, relatively liberal, what else can I say, liberal thoughts, progressive thoughts. Progressive thoughts are like fresh wind coming from outside. Liberal views, progressive views are like fresh air coming from outside. And the oppressive man keeps all his windows shut and does not let fresh air enter his household. Even the air conditioner helps so little. All pervasive is the male scent of your breath. The cut flowers in the vases have begun to smell of human sweat. Now this is very disgusting imagery, extremely nauseating and disgusting. It is like the entire house is smelling of the husband's male scent, human sweat, his sweat. It is very nauseating even to think of. Maybe those of you who are very sensitive find it physically revolting. I do as well. Anyway, what does it mean? It means that the entire worldview held by such oppressive men, such oppressive husbands, is mired in self-love, mired in self-centeredness. And this sentiment of self-centeredness is so appalling that it is as disgusting as the smell of human sweat, or an entire house smelling of someone's sweat. Okay, so this is disgusting and very extremely revolting, and this imagery of the smell of human sweat is chosen very aptly to describe this situation. There is no more singing, no more dance. My mind is an old playhouse with all its lights put out. This is the result of continued oppression of the wife by the husband. There is no more singing, no more dance. The wife is not free to pursue his likings, to pursue her likings. Therefore, my mind is an old playhouse with all its lights put out. Obviously, as you can understand, the name of the poem is taken from this phrase, an old playhouse. And here we can understand that the old playhouse is a metaphor of the oppressed wife's mind. The ruin of years of oppression, we can assume, is happening here. An old playhouse with all its lights put out. The mind has gone as dark of despair, as dark by despair, as a playhouse without its lights turned on, with its lights put out. Darkness means being in despair, darkness means being extremely unhappy. But why playhouse? Why not any house? She could have described her mind as just a house. Why is she choosing playhouse? Playhouse is because it is particularly attached to art. A playhouse, when well lit and functioning, is a stage for artists to perform. It again emphasizes the choice of the playhouse metaphor, again emphasizes the creativity and the negligence of creativity by the oppressive system. The creative nature of women, the creative nature of such unfortunate wives, is doomed by the oppressive system and darkened, put into despair. The strong man's technique is always the same. He serves his love in lethal doses. This is also important. The strong man's technique is always the same. He serves his love in lethal doses. The strong man knows only one way to love, to inflict love. It is again hinting towards the physical act of lovemaking. Patriarchal societies often capitalize on this notion that love equals physical penetration, that the active agency is always residing with the man, because the man is the entity who is forcing himself into the other entity, the woman. Okay, therefore, the physical lovemaking is often taken as a pertinent metaphor for lovemaking. And why is it lethal? It is lethal because it destroys. It is lethal because it kills. Not physically, not immediately, but mentally. As we have been seeing in this poem, the negativity of such dysfunctional marriages, such oppressive marriages, is not often in physical violence. It is often implicit in the mental violence it wreaks on the wife's mind. That is why the love of such an oppressive husband is lethal, fatal. For love is Narcissus at the water's edge, haunted by its own lonely face. Let us examine this first. Love is Narcissus at the water's edge, haunted by its own lonely face. This is a classical allusion, the figure of Narcissus. Some of us may have known the word narcissism already. It comes from this Greek mythical figure of Narcissus, who was a very beautiful boy. Okay, but he was extremely enraptured by his own beauty. So what did he do? He all the time sat beside a pond and looked into the water to see his reflection there. He was in love with his own beauty. It is an extreme example of self-centeredness, of self-love. Okay, one way it can be seen as an example of self-centeredness. So what happens? Narcissus, haunted by its own lovely face. That is how the narrator describes the love of the oppressive husband. Although he says that he loves the wife, although he thinks that he loves the wife, it is actually himself that he loves. And all husbands who buy into the system of patriarchy ultimately end up doing the same thing. They may vouch for their love for their family, but actually what they love is only themselves. Now, the remaining part of the poem is a very interesting and rather optimistic, in a way, conclusion. What is it? And yet, it must seek, it means this love, the concept of love, and yet it must seek at last an end, a pure, total freedom. It must will the mirrors to shatter and the kind night to erase the water. According to the narrator, no matter how perverted a love may be originally, it will eventually seek out a greater, higher aim. Because, according to the narrator, apparently, love cannot stay confined inside the confinement of self-centeredness. So how does it aspire? How does love aspire for a higher end? It must seek at last an end, a pure total freedom. So if love is taken to its extreme, no matter how petty its origin may be, it will seek a total freedom. It must will the mirrors to shatter. Mirrors are reflectors. Just like Narcissus always looked into a pond for reflection, mirrors are like the water's surface. They represent the reflectivity of self-centeredness. The self-centered man always loves to look at his own reflection in the mirror. But if his love be genuine, this is a very optimistic thought actually under the circumstances. It is interesting that she maintains this optimism, that even this love, if it grows, if it is allowed to grow, it will shatter the mirrors. It will the mirrors to shatter. Will means, the power of the mind, the power of will. Applying this willpower, true love must shatter the mirrors. And the kind night to erase the water. It must will the kind night to erase the water. Night brings darkness. No matter if you are looking at a mirror or looking at the clear surface of a lake of water like Narcissus, you cannot see if there is no light. Therefore, night is helpful in the shattering of this delusion of self-love, and the very act of shattering the mirrors is always helpful in the destruction of self-love. Self-centeredness rather. Self-love is a rather different thing. It has several positive connotations, so I should not have said self-love in the previous sentences. Consider it as self-centeredness. The shattering of the mirrors and the bringing of the night are both representative of a will to end the trap of self-centered love. Only through destroying this self-centered idea, which, remember, is actually a contribution of patriarchal social structure. It is patriarchy which teaches the husband that the wife has no mental autonomy. It is patriarchy which teaches the husband that you are lord of your house. You are not your spouse's companion, you are not your spouse's spouse, but you are the lord of your house, you are your spouse's lord. You are the lord to your sons and daughters as well. Therefore, patriarchy, this is how patriarchy encourages self-centeredness, and this is what must be overcome by the force of love, actual love, if it is let grow, if it is allowed to grow. That is more or less the argument of the poem. Now, in order to completely grasp the context and the background of the poem, we have to look at certain texts. We have already talked about these three texts which give you a background idea of feminism. Actually, if you read the introductions to these texts, you will have a background idea. If you manage to read all these texts, which is quite something of a task, but if you manage to read them, they will give you a very comprehensive and thorough knowledge of feminism. And you may have noticed that the three previous names were all foreigners. Now, unfortunately, so far, the internationally recognized core texts of feminism are often composed by non-Indian women, but we have from India very eminent historical women personalities who have worked a lot to improve the fate of the Indian woman, and it is our duty as Indians actually to read more about these persons: Savitribai Phule, Begum Rokeya, and Phulan Devi. There are others, of course, just like there are other critics than the critics we have mentioned. There are other Indian women of note, but I have chosen the name of these three because they are somehow or other related to the relatively deprived sections of Indian society. None of them come from the so-called high castes, for example. They are all, some way or other, socially backward, or so-called, they hail from the so-called socially backward castes, and their struggles are an inspiration for all Indians everywhere, for all time to come. So please look at the life and work, the lives and works of Savitribai Phule, Begum Rokeya, and Phulan Devi to understand how the Indian woman has fought against her oppressors whenever she has had the resources, the chance. And to understand the tradition of feminist poetry, we should read other feminist poets. And of course, again here, there are many names which could be taken, but I have chosen three of the most well-known feminist poets of our time. They are Sylvia Plath, Marge Piercy, and Dr. Maya Angelou, all of whom hold very important places in the corpus of modern English poetry, and extremely expressive too, extremely original, much like Kamala Das. And if you read all these poets together, at least 2 or 3 poems by all of these poets, you will have a much better understanding of how feminist poetry strives to establish women's autonomy in art, in language. So that would be all for this lecture, and in the description portion of the YouTube video, I will upload links to useful material regarding the works and life of Kamala Das, as well as texts relating to feminism. and feminist poetry. Thank you.